Hello and welcome to Brain Says Strange Things. I'm Patrick, this is my brother Jordan, and this is the podcast where we talk about horror movies. This episode we are going to be talking about arguably one of the greatest working filmmakers today, and one of Jordan's personal favorites, the great David Fincher. We've seen a lot of his movies, as I would imagine most of you have. He's a very successful and popular filmmaker, and we thought a worthy subject of an episode of the podcast. So we selected two films to look at specifically, and we may mention some others at the end. The ones we'll be reviewing in depth are The Game, starring Michael Douglas, which we watched earlier tonight, me for the first time, and you had rewatched it after having seen it before. And we also took a look at Gone Girl, a very popular recent film by David Fincher. So I think we're going to talk about The Game first. This is very much a quintessential David Fincher movie.
I feel like you can say that about all of them.
Yeah, there's definitely, but I feel like The Game is kind of like a signature piece for him. So it stars Michael Douglas, and it has a very strange but intriguing premise. So Michael Douglas plays this sort of cranky, aloof, executive, investment banker is what he is. Very successful, but he has a dark past. His father committed suicide before his eyes as a child. He's divorced. He seems to lead a very solitary existence. He does have a brother, a sort of eccentric character played by Sean Penn, who gives him an unusual birthday gift. He presents him with a card, an invitation to play something just called The Game. Essentially.
Well, it's a card for like this service that offers.
Yeah, and you know, it's not really described exactly what the game is or how it works. But Michael Douglas goes to this company that provides this service, this entertainment experience, and undergoes hours and hours of rigorous psychic or psychiatric, I should say, and physical testing to kind of set up the game, all the while not really getting any answers as to what form the game might take. He's told it's different for everyone. And then he goes on about his life and is told that the game will at some point begin. He can choose to participate or reject it as he sees fit. That turns out not to really be the case. And it essentially, it's a difficult movie to describe, but a series of bizarre circumstances happen to this character, and they escalate in intensity throughout the film. So, for example, one of the first thing that happens is he comes back to his house and he finds a figure, a human-sized figure, lying on the ground in front of his home. This is where his father was found when he had committed suicide when Michael Douglas' character was a child. So this is a very disturbing thing to find. It ends up being this clown doll. There's a key in the mouth. Later he finds what this key is a part of. So it's this big, elaborate scenario.
Like conspiracy theory.
Yeah, that this company has created. And throughout the whole movie, Michael Douglas' character and you as the viewer do not know where does the game start, where does the game end, who amongst all the characters he is encountering are participants in the game, and ultimately what is the motive of the people who are putting him through this situation as it becomes apparent, or it seems to be more and more sinister and dangerous as it goes along. And so all this is very David Fincher, high concepts, escalating threat that really ends up in a really crazy kind of place. These are all common tropes to David Fincher movies. So I think that's about as well as I can explain the game in terms of premise. We do want to say, too, I should have mentioned this up top, when talking about David Fincher movies, we're going to have to spoil these films to a certain extent. So if you have not seen The Game, if you have not seen Gone Girl, I think you should see both of these films. But if you have not, do not watch this episode of the podcast until you have. And then come back and watch it. Because that's a David Fincher thing. Twist endings, you don't really know what's going on. What you're watching may not actually be...
Multiple twists, yes.
Yeah, multiple twists and layers of reality. So it's really impossible to discuss his movies without spoiling it. So spoilers ahead. I feel like I've talked a lot already without having said too much. You liked the game pretty well on your initial viewing. It wasn't one of your favorites of Fincher's.
No, I didn't like it the first
What
time.
is your take having watched it again recently? It looked great on Blu-ray, I have to
I don't
say
think
that.
I changed my opinion.
Okay.
I didn't really like it that much.
Okay.
Actually.
And what is your objection to it?
Did any of it come across as silly to you?
Yes, but I would say that is the case with a lot of Fincher's movies, including Gone Girl.
See, I think you pull it off a little better. This almost the exact same thing in its other movies.
Agreed.
I think it was very much like Fight Club, which I think he pulled that off a lot better. Tied together a little better. This story I don't think holds up very well. I like the concept, but it's a little like you want people to kind of pay attention to all the little details of it, because eventually you'll be rewarded.
It's a puzzle.
At the end, sort of, you can figure it out. You're supposed to be confused halfway through it, not know, and then be surprised by the big ending.
Yep.
I think it's kind of weird because I knew how it was going to end because I had seen it before. But I think I stand by my original review.
Okay.
Because it seems a little too much like everything is so precisely done. And you get a little feeling that, okay, it's supposed to be a conspiracy with this whole company, basically. It's a company, right? There's got to be something bigger than the company. How are they able to create this thing without anybody noticing? I thought about that multiple times.
So can you give, like, I know exactly what you're talking about, and you're not wrong. Can you give, like, an example in the movie where, like, they would not have been able to do that and know that he would have gone here? Because I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I remember the end. So this is completely spoiling it.
Yep.
But the part where he jumps off the roof of the building, they get him to do it, basically. And apparently they have a thrown in line where they had a contingency plan, which I thought was kind of sloppy. But if he had just jumped off to the right a little bit, he'd be dead. He fell 90 stories through a plate glass. Even if it was breakaway glass, even if he was a stuntman, he's an older guy. I mean, it's not a realistic story by any means, but it needs a little bit of those elements. Fight Club is like that, totally. But
all his movies are.
But it's not... Fight Club is, like, not believable at all.
But it's consistent
this one
with the
wants to
reality
be
of the movie.
believable.
Yeah.
But it's doing the exact same thing.
There's also a difference between believable in terms of this could really happen in the real world. I don't think any of Fincher's movies hit that mark except Zodiac.
But he's good at getting close to that point.
Well,
what
you've got to do is, even if you're not realistic in terms of this could happen in the real world, you need to be consistent and believable within the reality that you set up. And I think it's arguable that the game does not do that.
Yeah.
Right?
No matter what your concept is, silly or serious, you have to be committed to it. You have to, like, stick with it.
Okay.
So, like, halfway through, you can't turn and be like, oh, don't worry about these clues. They don't matter. The main thing is, like, the whole story. Like, a few of these things won't fit together. But at the same time, they're telling you, pay attention to every tiny detail. I thought about that when he found the keys in the glove box.
Okay.
And I was like, what would have happened if he didn't look in the glove box?
Right. Another contingency plan, perhaps.
Maybe they just have a whole... But see, I don't know. You can always answer it with that. So it's like you can't even criticize this movie. It's like the whole movie has like a contingency plan for its plot.
Okay.
You know, it's like everything is set up.
Well, there's two... Okay.
Sure, maybe they had more keys in the trunk or something. But
well, because Fincher is your guy. I mean, I love David Fincher, too, as most people do. His movies are critically acclaimed and popular, but he's really one of your favorites.
Well, working today, yes.
But I have to say, I enjoyed the game a lot more than you did.
Must have.
And so you really don't like it at all? Because I want to get into what you like.
I don't think it's a bad movie. I kind of stick by my original review where it's like...
Well, let's talk about that point, which I think you articulated pretty well. Like how, believable, even within the world of this movie, is it that this company, however vast, whatever resources it has, would be able to set up these scenarios and manipulate him to this extent. Yeah. So I want to respond to that a little bit because I knew before watching it that was your objection, right? Because you didn't spoil the game for me, but just in discussing it, you had said that's what didn't work for it for you. So I feel like I was hyper alert. So like every time like something would happen, I was like, oh, I bet this is what Jordan's talking about, but you could explain it this way. Yes, I was like just really on the lookout for that. And I have to say, like, I don't know, maybe if I hadn't been so like on the alert for it, I would have reacted differently, but I didn't think that element was nearly as distracting for me personally as it was for you. That was pretty minor. The movie essentially has two answers to that, right? One is the hours and hours of rigorous psychological and physical testing that they put him through, right? These intense...
even at the most, it was for one day.
It was.
Okay.
But I feel like that you could use that to explain, like, well, how did they know when he saw this, he would do this? Like, well, because he was in the room responding to the images, and what does this make you think of? This deep psychological testing. Yeah. And then the contingency plans, right? Like, we don't know how many of these scenarios, like, well, what if this would have happened? Well, maybe they would have had this other thing set up that would have led to the same result. Now, does that mean it's not completely silly? Absolutely not.
Yeah,
it's absurd.
A business that good would not be doing this.
Well, and they make a point of like paying the bill for it all, and it's such a large bill. But the amount that it would cost, the resources to set this kind of thing up, would just be absurd.
You'd have to pay off an entire city.
This is a fantasy movie.
Yes.
There's no question about that.
Yeah, I get it.
But I was able to buy into. I guess I was able to accept those two suspensions of disbelief, that the psychological and physical testing that he underwent before the game began, coupled with these contingency plans, were enough to answer any seeming plot holes. For me. Now, is that giving the movie, kind of a pass? Absolutely. But the thing is, I was really intrigued by what the ultimate motivation was. I love mysteries, not so much in terms of figuring out what's going on, but I love the atmosphere of a mystery. The idea of finding a key and knowing at some point you'll find a hole for that key. That's great. I love that stuff. So that for me...
It's even a literal key, too.
It is. And that for me, like, carried it beyond any, like, I guess you're either going to accept that or you're not. You know what I mean? And the accumulation of those kind of events doesn't really make it any better or worse. Either you accept that the company has these resources and would be able to manipulate him to this extent, or you don't. And I guess, for me, I did. So I enjoyed the movie. It was a silly, outrageous premise, but I thought it was committed to that premise. But for you, it was just too much of a leap.
It's almost like...
Which is valid.
Well, it's like I know Fincher's movies a little too much more.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's part
because I know he can do it better than that. Well, I like this as like an early work.
Well, and exactly, that's my point too. Like, you're right. Yes, he does it better in Fight Club. Yes, he does it here. Yes, he does it there. But like, this is kind of the first time he really...
Well, his bad stuff is good. Mm-hmm. Like compared to a lot of people.
So, but this would be low on the list of Fincher films.
Yep, because I think I've seen all of his movies now. But I remember, like, the lowest on my list were always, like, The Game and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
That one I've not seen.
I'd probably have to go back and revisit that one, too. Maybe just because it's not, like, his style. But I guess The Social Network is not really his type of story either, but it still did that well.
Yep.
I don't know. I was kind of underwhelmed
by the game.
By the game, yeah.
Okay. Well, can we talk, like, what did you like about it? Like, what did you think was done well? Because you didn't hate it. You said even his worst movies.
I think it's a great idea for a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think...
And he didn't write this movie. There's another thing we should point out, right? So all the plot kind of... Well, he may have contributed uncredited to the script. I guess I don't know.
I'm not sure. But,
yeah.
I don't know. I like the way it looked. I like the fact that you can tell it's a David Fincher movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's closer to the beginning of his career where it looks more like a music video.
Okay.
I like the way he's very visually focused. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are literal keys, but I find that still believable. There's visual things in every single frame, and this is what he also gets better at, which a lot of people don't like him for, like actors he works with, because he's like so meticulous about everything perfectly in place. But then there's the scene where the whole game falls apart and he crashes, he gets drugged, and he crashes into the checkboard, chess, and it all comes crashing to the floor. It's like there's a way of visually presenting the story, and it seems like that's going on all the time in his movies. So I like that part of it. I wish the story had been a little more engaging. I like Michael Douglas. I found the performance a little odd in this movie. I just didn't. Maybe it was. I think it was just the story. It just wasn't. It didn't really
just
involve
couldn't
me enough.
Pass it.
I did find it kind of silly in a lot of parts.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just something weird when he wakes up in Mexico and.
See, I love that though. It's so absurd.
I like that idea. I wish it would have almost like started there. It's kind of a weird thing to throw in at the end. I mean,
but I like that. I like that just escalating insanity of it. Like, how did this character end up here, and just having followed him along that?
But even at the beginning, I was thinking like, well, what is going to be the main thing that makes him call this number? Because he's removed from everybody. Like he has an ex-wife.
Like everything's
no
taken
women in his
from
life.
him.
Yeah, all he has is money, and he's not happy. So what's going to make him actually call this number? I don't remember what did he was kind of bored.
What number?
The number on the card.
Oh, well, he saw it at his place of work, his business. I think is what it was. Basically, it was like
so it was there.
It was basically like right in front of him. Yeah.
Okay. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess
which they place themselves there. See, it's like you're always constantly filling in.
Right. I guess you're right that the script is definitely the weakest part of the game, but God, I almost hate to say that because I do think it's a good script. Again, if you can accept those kind of two premises, I had a blast watching this movie. So I really think viewers are either going to fall into one of two camps represented by Jordan and I's reaction to the movie. So I would encourage people to see it because I think if you can kind of buy into the premise of it, well, hopefully I guess you've already seen it since we told you to watch the movie first, but if we didn't spoil it too bad actually. If you can,
I just told the last scene.
Yeah, if you can buy into the premise, I think it's a lot of fun. And if you can't, it may irritate you. But even as an early step in Fincher's career, man, this is a pretty finished, polished piece of work, as an early work, for a director.
Yeah,
you can see this guy's going places.
There's nothing sloppy about the way the movie's put together as a whole.
No,
I think it's just
beautifully done.
For me, it's just kind of in there. Almost like it's a great idea, but I didn't buy it.
Okay, well let's talk.
I wish there would have been
let's talk about.
Okay,
well let's jump then ahead in his career and talk about Gone Girl. Unless I'm forgetting something in theaters now, I'm going to feel so if I am his most recent film.
Gone Girl?
Yeah. Right? Okay. I am terrible on current
Age of
movies.
Ultron.
Yeah.
Should just piss off all the fanboys.
I'm terrible on current movies, but there's a reason we always talk about like older
I think
movies.
you produced Daredevil.
No idea what's going on in cinema today. No, so we'll take a look at Gone Girl. Which I would say contains many of the same tropes.
Oh yeah, there's common themes throughout,
including
movies.
An absurd, silly premise. But it doesn't seem silly at first. It's a very dark, gritty, noir crime movie based on Gillian Flynn's novel. She also wrote the
Gillian.
Is that how it's pronounced? All right, fair enough. She also wrote the screenplay for this, which apparently has a different ending. I did not read the book, so we won't really get into that too much unless you know about it. But
yeah, I know about the books.
Well, maybe you read up on what the difference was.
No, not really.
Anyway, so this movie stars Ben Affleck as a kind of a struggling writer who has been having marital problems with his wife and comes home to find her on their anniversary missing.
It's like a 4-year anniversary.
Missing, yeah, and quickly presumed dead. There's scenes of a struggle at their home. There's really no trace of her, and he becomes the number one suspect.
As they always do.
Yep, and as the movie progresses, you find out more about what may or may not have led up to this event. There's some unreliable narrators involved in this story. This is very twisty mystery story. Mm-hmm. However, it is as much a commentary on the current 24 hours news cycle and the media and celebrity and these kinds of cases. I know you appreciated the Nancy Grace character in here. I thought of you when she was on. So it's as much that, and really the mystery is solved, halfway? The third of the way through the movie?
Flips on its head halfway through.
And then it flips, and the rest of it is it's
a different kind of
It's a very different kind of movie. Yeah, it's a very different kind of movie, kind of following the events to their logical, crazy conclusion. And again, it's really just as much, if not more, interested in examining how the media and how the public perceives these kinds of sensational news stories and the kind of weird celebrity culture that builds up around them. That was definitely the most interesting element of this movie. But it had a great plot, a great mystery, I think a phenomenal performance by Ben Affleck and a lot of the other actors in this movie. And it was a great movie. So what was your take on Gone Girl?
I thought it was great. Mm-hmm. I watched
You were really impressed by this.
Well, movie. I was really surprised by it. And looking back on it, I shouldn't have been, because knowing Fincher.
Right.
Because hearing him talk about how he even sold the movie is really interesting.
Okay,
it was interesting to me. Well, this is how I went into it. It came out in theaters and I didn't see it. I usually see all Fincher's movies when they came out, but it didn't sound that interesting to me. Because the way that the commercials and all made it play out,
it's a mystery.
It's a mystery. Oh, okay. Either the answer is going to be he did or he didn't.
Right. That's not what
honestly,
this movie is
honestly, I'm just kind of like, who cares if he did?
Right.
That's not really an interesting part of the story.
And
because that's what everybody was talking about.
Right.
Everybody wanted to know.
That's how they sold it.
That's how they sold it. And he wanted,
but the movie doesn't give a shit about that.
He had to fight to get no scenes from the last half of the movie in any of the trailers, or any of the ads.
Awesome.
Just like the best story about when he made Seven is they wanted to cut the scene with the head in the box. And he's like, "You guys are idiots." The studio wanted to cut it. And like, everybody. No one's going to remember the name of this movie, but they'll call it The Head in the Box.
Yeah,
movie.
and boy,
they'll
was
remember
he right.
it. And to this day, people remember it as the movie with the head in the box.
Very iconic.
So the way that he sold it was really interesting because it did fool me, and I know Fincher like the back of my hand too.
He's a master.
And I went into it, and as soon as it flipped in the middle of it, and I was watching it, I was like, God damn it, that's good! Good job, Fincher. I was really impressed.
So I really.
Well, you have to spoil it.
I was going to say, I really do want to explicitly spoil it this term because I'm curious about what you were specifically so surprised about and where you thought it was going. So, what was the most shocking?
The surprise is that she framed or she staged her own kidnapping. I was most surprised not by that. I thought that was clever. I didn't see that coming.
Okay.
But the way that it's presented, that she's making friends with the neighbors slowly, and she's writing this story. This is the same reason why I like Ben Affleck in this movie. Because someone asked me
so good.
Someone asked me how do you think he'll be as the new Batman? And I was like, I don't know. He was great in Gone Girl, but honestly, I think he is kind of that character.
Yep.
And so I think Fincher perfectly cast.
Yes, that's what I thought.
So ultimately I was kind of I don't know if he'll make a good Batman. He was perfect for this. Because the best scene, I think, is at the end when he's finally given up and they're like, all right, just confess. Just what did you do? Just tell us.
Right.
And he's like, he has his lawyer, Tyler Perry, with him. And he's just like, oh, I'm armed with the truth. I'm just going to do that. And he's like, well, the truth doesn't always play on these situations. He's like, no, I'm just going to do it. And he tells the truth. And honestly, it sounds horrible. He tells the exact truth.
And he's awkward in front of the camera.
He's really awkward.
And people
That's
hate
a great
him.
scene, too, where he's smiling when they're doing the press conference. And he looks really awkward.
Yep.
And I think it's that guy's been there before.
Yes.
Not that Ben Affleck has killed anybody.
When that was happening,
spotlight.
during that disastrous news conference where you could see, oh man, the public is turning on him, I thought of when Warner Brothers announced that he was going to be Batman. That's what I thought of. You know what I mean? And I'm like, what a great bit of casting this was. Because Ben Affleck is, in a way, he has that reputation. I mean, he's a very successful actor, but there's a lot of people who just don't like Ben Affleck, and they don't want to see him in certain kinds of roles, and they won't accept him in certain kinds of roles. Mm-hmm. So I thought he was able to play that perfectly, and I thought he was perfectly cast, and he actually just did a very great job as his character. No. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah. Yeah, it was. I like both of these movies. I thought they were a blast. I don't know that I put Gone Girl too far ahead of the game, but
did any maybe the same part surprised you? I mean, you didn't know anything about going through it.
No, I didn't.
Well, my surprising part was when I saw her writing in the diary,
right?
Like what she'd been writing the whole time,
right?
This fake story,
right?
I thought that was a great way to marry this thing together,
right?
She's actually making up this made-up story.
So a lot of their relationship is flashbacks, some from his perspective, some from her perspective, and at the halfway point, whatever, third of the way point, the twist, we find out, everything that she was narrating, almost everything, is not necessarily true, and so it is outright false, So it was a good twist, kind of a puzzle in that way. And so it was an intriguing mystery, up to that point, and then again, at the end, kind of like the game and all of Fincher's movies, you have this escalating scenario that just spirals into insanity. And I think it is really over the top. It is really silly. There's nothing.
It launches into total horror movie.
There's nothing realistic about this character of this woman. She's fascinating, but like you could say about the game, do you believe that she could pull this off to this extent, that she could be so calculating and cold and she was almost like a super villain? And the movie knows this. The movie knows that.
Well, this one's a little more careful to do that because there's the scene where she gets robbed. Which I love that part because what I liked about it is you actually kind of felt bad for this character a little bit, or I did. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but she's on the run. She's disguised as a different person because she's just laying low, watching this whole thing play out in the media, like you're talking about.
Yep.
And she gets robbed by just these hillbilly types, just because they see she's carrying around a giant wad of cash. And then they're just it's not personal, we just need the money. And she's like, fuck. And her whole plan is just completely ruined. Because all she had was all the cash.
And at this point, it's not really a mystery anymore.
Nope,
we're just watching what's going to happen to this character in this insane situation.
So that one little scene kind of made that part fit where you're like, well, something would go wrong. She would make a mistake somewhere. Yeah. But you don't have to show every single
But I still feel like she was almost superhuman in her
she totally was. I thought that when she's bleeding on the floor. She's bleeding into the pan.
Yeah.
I was like,
I thought that too.
I was like, you almost have to just be supervillain to do this. No human.
Well, and that's what she was.
A little bit.
But you know what? But again, the movie was so committed to that I just found it hugely entertaining to the end when they come back together as a couple. And I just think the first line, which is the same as the last line, except we know what it means at the end. What have we done to each other? What will we do? And she looks at the camera. It's just terrific, and it does, and we've long since solved the mystery at that point, So I thought it was a great movie. Again, like all of Fincher's movies, it looked fantastic.
Yep.
Absolutely great music, as in all of his films. And
that was one thing that was kind of lacking in the game too, a little bit.
Yeah, well, who he worked with is
Trent Reznor
in the last several of his films, and he was not, I don't think, yet.
Not at that point. I don't think.
So I think
that didn't seem like it.
That is really kind of this is a horror movie podcast, and we said...
Well, I think Gone Girl fits in the horror category.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. But even stuff like The Social Network, which, if you were just to describe the plot is about as far from a horror movie as you can get, it still has that feel. And I think Fincher's a big part of that, but I think Trent Reznor's scores are a big part of that as well.
I remember a review, now we'll have to talk about The Social Network, but I think it applies to all his movies, and Gone Girl too, is that kind of what you said. On the surface, if you explain it, it sounds like a movie about the guys who created Facebook, which I kind of thought. I still went to see it in theaters, but I kind of thought that's what it was going to be.
That's kind of interesting.
But the review that I read said it just all this does is show that these themes are always going to be relevant.
Yeah.
Like, he breaks it down to, like, he finds, like, one point to the story.
Yeah.
And it's just, like, no matter what you're talking about. You could be talking about Ben Affleck killing his... Well, I don't want to say him, his character.
Right.
Killing somebody or someone taking over Facebook. You can make that just as exciting as a murder.
Well, that's a great rule of storytelling, right? The more specific you are, the more universal your theme is going to be. And Aaron Sorkin wrote the Social Network.
Yeah.
What a great collaboration that was. We should have an Aaron Sorkin episode sometime. So yeah, I guess, so we talked about Gone Girl, we talked about the game. Any kind of final thoughts about Fincher? Any other movies you want to, like, just quick mention as favorites or favorite Fincher moments or tropes or anything?
Well, the first one that I saw was Fight Club.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still, because I've recently rewatched a few of his. Fight Club I've rewatched many times. And it still holds up. Mm-hmm. Fight Club is great. Let's see, I rewatched Panic Room, which also holds up really well.
Really good, straightforward,
I was almost
perfectly constructed little thriller.
Because I haven't really reversed my opinions on any of these movies, like, because I've seen them over the course of my life, like,
sure,
as they've come out, and just now I'm kind of revisiting them, and I still kind of think the same thing, even with the game. Like, it's not that great. I kind of think I would have the same feeling about Benjamin Button too. Mm-hmm. These are just always things I would say. Like, those are my two least favorite Fincher movies. Just like, those are my preloaded answers that I have. But I think it's true. But I think that speaks to him. It's like, he can get his point across really well.
Well, what I like about Fincher is that he is a mainstream filmmaker. You know, he's not out there. He wants to speak to a mass audience. And he's very good at making just really entertaining movies that make a lot of money, that a lot of people go to see, that are really smart, that are really creative, that are unique. He cares about the craft of storytelling rather than just selling a product. And that's pretty rare in Hollywood.
He's just good at a lot of things.
He is.
He's just kind of like a Renaissance man.
And my favorite is Zodiac, which unfortunately
very underrated
was
movie.
Not a really successful movie for him, and actually does not fit a lot of the tropes that we've been ticking off here. It's based on a true story. It kind of embraces ambiguity in a way that a lot of his movies don't. There isn't any answer or twist per se at the end of the film, but man, is that just like, I don't know how long it is, 2 hours, 2.5 hours.
It's long, but that's like the only complaint people ever come up with.
But that's not a complaint for me. I was going to say that is 2 hours, however long it is, 2 hours, 3 hours of sustained tension, ominous atmosphere. That is a true, I think it's one of the great horror films, if you want to call it a slasher film. It's just great movies. It's really underrated. So that's one that I would like to mention. I really like that. But all of his stuff, I think, is at least worth a look, you know.
Yep, I wish I had a box set.
Yeah.
But then that would mean that he's done.
Yeah,
so
right?
Keep going.
We want him to keep going, so...
the girl with the dragon tattoo. That's the other one.
Another good one.
About. Yep.
Another great marriage.
That's why I always like going to his movies in the theaters, and I'm so mad at myself that I didn't go see
Well, we'll
right
see
away
the next one.
Because...
We'll go to see the next one, and we'll review it here for you on Brain Says Strange Things. So I think that does it for this episode on David Fincher. This was a really fun episode to do. He's such a great filmmaker. And one that we could definitely have another episode on, too. So we definitely may revisit Fincher, one of his films, paired with something else in a future episode. So that will do it for this episode. We will be back soon talking about some kind of scary movie, and we hope you guys will join us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Bye.